It is a spectacular pleasure, a very special pleasure, to end actually 2020 with something, a wonderful program and a hopeful program. And actually your presence tonight is more special than usual, as I reflected, because we're all challenged by the COVID pandemic. It's holiday season, and for a lot of us, it's going to snow. Maybe not in Colorado, but in the Northeast. If you're living with dementia, if you're caring for someone with dementia, or if you know, love, and care about someone coping with dementia, you're adapting to a challenge within a crisis, which is no small thing, and something that I think is very hard for many of us to even describe in words, which is what makes your presence tonight even more special. Thank you for being here. A word about our program. The Caregiver Support Program of the Dementia Care Collaborative was started at Mass General in 2017. We're a part of the Palliative Care and Geriatric Medicine Division. As many of you know, the mission of our program is to transform memory care. We exist at Mass General to educate, support, and connect individuals, and we truly hope to reach patients, caregivers, clinicians, and members of the community. We offer care consultations to caregivers and patients in specific Mass General clinics, skills classes for caregivers, support groups, and health and resiliency programs. Finally, the Caregiver Support Program is entirely funded through philanthropy. And if you're interested in learning how to support our program, please reach out to anyone on our staff. And now, without further ado, I am so excited to welcome our panel of experienced dementia caregivers. With openness and great courage, 3 individuals, Prilla, Bernice, and Bob, will share their stories about caring for spouses and parents through the course of dementia. Even though each story and each family is unique, their stories about caregiving are informative, and many, many aspects will sound familiar to you. They'll offer their hard-earned wisdom about providing care at home, asking for help, decision-making about residential care, and importantly, their own self-care. And now a few words about each of our wonderful panelists. After each of them speaks, after all 3 speak, we'll then begin our conversation with them from the questions in chat. Prilla is a caregiver to her husband, George. They've been married 52 years. Prilla is a visual artist, and the couple is blessed to have 2 sons, a daughter-in-law, son-in-law, 4 lovely grandchildren, and Prilla's sister, all of whom live in Jamaica Plain. George was diagnosed with mild Alzheimer's in October 2018, and he's been living in Rogerson House since July 3rd, 2019. Bernice is a caregiver to her father, John. She's a real estate broker and dementia coach. And Bernice is a member of the Governor's Advisory Council for Alzheimer's Research and Treatment. She is a lifelong resident of Massachusetts and lives in Boston with her family. Bob was a caregiver to his wife, Jackie. He's a retired psychologist, grew up in Virginia, and as he says, hence his Southern accent, even though he and Jackie moved to Massachusetts in 1974. And Jackie and Bob raised their son and daughter in Sudbury, Massachusetts, before moving to Boston 15 years ago. Now, the core of Bob's support system of 4 grandsons, ages 4 through 8. So we know you're running a lot, Bob. And now it's with great, great pleasure that I turn the program over to Prilla. Thank you. Prilla's on mute. Nori, have you unmuted her? Okay.
unmute me and I unmute me, but anyway,
Now,
we are.
you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good to go.
All right. I'll begin by telling you a little bit about George and our journey, and then I'll talk about 4 issues for caregivers of Alzheimer's patients using the context of my experience. George has a PhD from UC Berkeley. He immediately left experimental physics to focus on educational issues. After his postdoc in physics education, he mediated between content experts and cinematographers to help create TV and print-based non-science semester courses for distance learners in the late 70s. He wrote
Can you
educational...
speak up a little bit? Sorry, just can you speak up a little bit if possible?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thank you, Perla.
He wrote educational software. Is that better? He wrote educational software published by Scholastics. He taught design of educational software and web-based learning materials at Harvard Graduate School of Education for 9 years and ran the technology and education program there. He was one of 3 founders of Codman Academy in Dorchester, now K through 12, whose students are mostly people of color and all go to post-secondary education. He feels his years at Codman were the most meaningful of his career. He ran the first 4 years of educational technology there, wrote software for a behavior management system, was a board member, all as a volunteer. And he established an annual scholarship towards college tuition for a graduating senior majoring in STEM. George was an extremely active father of our 2 sons and dedicated to family. And he was always supportive of my professional career as a visual artist. He loved singing, and over the years did a lot of adventurous traveling. As grandchildren came along, he was active in providing childcare until he was unable to because of increased cognition and depression issues. George has been treated for chronic depression since the late 1980s. This came with low self-esteem and occasional outbursts of anger and self-hate, accompanied by banging things in frustration. Retirement was difficult, as he had always valued himself based on productivity and service. He felt at loose ends, had trouble both thinking of things he felt were valuable to do and motivating himself. He was scared he would follow his mother's path of dementia. He began having memory issues. His first consult with a neurologist was in 2015, who thought George had minimal cognitive dysfunction. As his depression and gradual cognitive worsening continued, he tried a series of interventions from therapy to transcranial magnetic stimulation to electroconvulsive therapy. The last was his best hope for a significant change in depression. During these years, there were, of course, many good times when George seemed to be his own self. However, he reacted increasingly with anger and verbal self-abuse when he couldn't do the things he used to be able to do. He believed everything was his fault and couldn't believe his failings were the result of illness. He often spoke of wanting to end his life. He'd say, "If I can't live in my head, life is not worth living." All of this became incredibly difficult to live with. At times, our relationship became fraught because I got hooked by his anger and because he heard any comment or question from me as a judgment. Number 1, the disconnect between what I was seeing and medical evaluations. George was great at masking during appointments and when he was with people other than me. I always thought things were worse than the test results revealed. There was a disconnect between medical assessments and what I knew was happening. I often wrote up accounts of what I observed at home to give to whichever doctor we were seeing. People seemed to think that George could find positive things to do, accept where he was, and adapt. He could not. For him, there was the intertwining of depression, anger, and cognitive decline. In the last meetings we had in the spring of 2019 with both medicating psychiatrist and neurologist, to put it bluntly, for George's angst, the psychiatrists seemed to blame his cognition and the neurologists seemed to blame his depression. 2, the role of family. We'd been blessed to be a close family where we shared feelings and thoughts. Happily, our sons stayed in the Boston area after college and both live in Jamaica Plain with their families. We would get together often, go on vacations together each year, and mutually enjoy each other. During the 5 to 6 years of George's progressing illness, I always shared with our sons. They've been supportive of both George and me. Summer 2018, my doctor son networked with his colleagues to help me find a new team of doctors who specialize in gerontology and dementia. In February and March 2019, George's psychiatrist organized 2 long meetings with George, both sons, and me, which were helpful. We all spoke deeply, and I was able to share my difficulties and need for time at home. Need for help at home. That winter, I realized I was no longer the self-sufficient mother or person. I knew I could not make and execute upcoming decisions about George by myself alone. I needed my sons emotionally in a new way. Later in the spring, when an offer of a permanent placement for George suddenly arose, I knew I needed them to help me make and execute the decision. I count on them. 3, how to know when to consider placing George in a memory facility. By late March, George was beginning to stay in bed all day, dozing, often getting up at 5 p.m. and going to bed at 9 or 9:30. He also developed serious diarrhea but refused to have a colonoscopy, so we treated the diarrhea with over-the-counter medicine. He had accidents. He began to have more frequent confusions and delusions. I came home once to discover a big mess in the bathroom, and another time to find him really worried about seeing the grandchildren here, wondering where they were now, and worrying about them. I knew I didn't want him to be alone when he experienced either of these conditions. By then I had 30 hours of caregivers each week, but otherwise wanted to be home with him. Sometimes my sister or a son would cover for me, but I soon felt trapped. I was trying to engage, read aloud to him, cajole him into going for a little walk late in the day, persuade him to go out to eat, watch TV with him at night, get him to drink water even if he didn't want to eat, and run our household. There was little left of my life. By May, I was thinking about full-time care. Live-in would be difficult in our apartment, and full-time shifts would be exorbitant. These options would continue the pattern of George being isolated, alone, here, unwilling to engage. I would still be juggling caregivers, their schedules, etc. We had an excellent long-term care policy, and I was in the process of paying for the first 90 days of care, so financially we were fine. I began looking at assisted living places with Alzheimer's units, hoping to find a respite week so I could go with my families on our summer vacation week. Liking Rogerson House, I was encouraged to get on the waiting list for a full-time room. I also was invited to visit their support group for spouses, meeting the next week, as there would be people who had already placed their spouse and 1 or 2 who had not. My question to the group was, how do you know when to place your spouse? To a person, they each said, sooner rather than later, because if you wait for a crisis, the facility you want won't have an opening perhaps. 2 days after that support group, I got a call saying we could have a permanent room July 1st, 2 weeks away, and that I had a few days to decide. The next day was my regular therapy appointment. By the end of that session, I knew I would take the room and move George. 4, managing my emotions. This has been hard. Living with George's anger was really toxic. I started going to a therapist in March 2017, and she has been helpful. I learned to say to him that I couldn't handle his anger and hate, so must remove myself for a while, go to the bedroom, or leave the apartment. Also, all the cumulative losses and changes meant gradual loss of the man I've lived with and loved for so long. It is ambiguous loss because he is still here in body and in many other ways. There was frequent grief and guilt. Also very helpful are the 2 support groups I joined in 2019 at Mass General and at Rogerson House, and the almost daily phone calls with my sister and contact with friends. George's and my relationship has always been based on honesty and openness. However, with an Alzheimer's patient, I was advised to lie or make up a fiblet. My sons and I invented a story for why he needed to go to Rogerson House, for an example. Once he was there, George was angry, felt betrayed, and continually told me he wanted to go home with me. Staff and support group members told me to fib. We'll talk about it tomorrow. You need to spend one more night here. However, my therapist and George's psychiatrist both strongly advocated telling George repeatedly until he understood that he is now living at Rogerson House where he can get good care and that it is way too much for me to take care of him at home. I tried this, but George is very good at arguing. Conversation only got tense and angry. I learned to deflect, change the subject, lie. And I learned to acknowledge and chat with him about his delusions. Recently, he told me he'd been boating that day. I asked whether he'd been sailing. Yes. So we talked about what it had been like, which was lovely. His anger dissipated sometime in the 2019-2020 winter, I think. Wanting to come home is infrequent. I deflect and he forgets. There is less and less of George now. He is out and about less often and spends more time in his room where I think he feels safe. I am still George's caregiver. However, it's wonderful not to have the daily unrelenting care and worry and much of my life back. I still need to be proactive with Rogerson staff, know what is going on. And since COVID began in March, it's been very hard because I can't see his room or the floor he is on or the daily care aides. Initially, I had one 10-minute FaceTime call per week. Now I see him face-to-face once a week for 30 minutes with one of my sons, if he's willing to come to the indoor living room above the floor he lives on. We can hug, which is wonderful. Since spring, I've been writing him almost daily on note cards which I mail. That way, whether he opens them or not, he knows they're from me and I am present somehow in his day. And for me, my life is busy and it's easy to forget him. Writing helps me keep him alive for me. The staff is creative and wonderful, and when I begin to feel too disconnected, I can ask for and receive information about his daily life. They also send occasional photos. Grief still surfaces, but I am very lucky and very grateful. Now I turn it over to Bernice.
Can you guys hear me now? Okay, wonderful.
I just have to say thank you. That was just, I don't know what, there aren't words, but thank you for sharing that story. It was so, I could relate to all of it. Thank you.
It was wonderful, Prilla. Thank you for sharing that. I learned so much about you and your husband. You know, as a fellow caregiver, I know how difficult it is and how difficult that decision was for you to make. So thank you for sharing that. I agree. I echo those sentiments. So when I was putting together my thoughts and my notes for this evening, I realized that I would have to take it back a little bit and talk a little bit about caregiving for my mom, which has ultimately made me a better caregiver for my dad. My daughter is here too. She wants to say a couple of things, so hopefully I'll leave some time for her to say a couple of things. But I want to thank you guys for inviting me onto the panel this evening. It really is good for me to be able to share, you know, all the things that I've learned over the last 20 years of caregiving. I've been a caregiver for 20 years, started with taking care of my mom, Mary, who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and now caring for my dad, who is diagnosed with dementia. I've learned a lot on my caregiving journey. Most of it I've learned the hard way because we were a family who did not want to share the diagnosis with anyone. But I wouldn't change that path for anything because it's led me to where I am today, a mother, a wife, a successful business owner, and a caregiver coach, which I would have never thought I would have been, and a much better caregiver to my father and to myself. So my mother was diagnosed 20 years ago. She was an active woman. She would go walking in our neighborhood. We've lived in this neighborhood for probably 60 years, but for 40 years, she walked, you know, the neighborhood, knew all of the neighbors. And one day she went walking and she got lost and she didn't come home. And my sister and my two brothers and my dad and my nephews and nieces at the time went looking for her and found her on like an island median. I don't know if you guys know Boston, but where Morrissey Boulevard is, it's very busy. She was standing there in the rain, no coat on, completely lost, disoriented, didn't know where she was. And we knew something was wrong. I actually think now that my dad probably knew something was going on, but he just didn't share it with us. So he definitely kept that a secret from us. And then after a few years of going back and forth to the doctor, some of you guys might be able to relate. They gave us a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, which was pretty devastating for my family. We didn't really know what Alzheimer's was. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know how it was going to affect my mom. We didn't know how it was going to affect us. So we just went about taking care of her. You know, we kept her safe. We didn't talk to each other about the diagnosis. We didn't tell anyone. We just said, you know, we're going to make sure that she doesn't wander off. We're going to make sure she eats, that she's clothed, that, you know, that she's well cared for. And then we just made this decision to keep it to ourselves. But after about 2 years of that diagnosis, we became overwhelmed with all of the behaviors that come along with taking care of someone with Alzheimer's or dementia. Behaviors like she wasn't eating, she would forget to bathe, she didn't know what to wear, she didn't comb her hair, and then eventually, you know, she forgot us. She remembered the pets though. She remembered our cats and she remembered the dog, but she didn't know who we were. I remember one time we went to a doctor's appointment and the doctor asked her, who are these two ladies with you? And it was myself and my sister. And she was like, I don't know who they are. Don't know who they are. And she asked her, well, who do you live with? And she named all the pets. And I was like, really? Like, you remember all the pets, but you don't remember us? But that was just a funny story. So I cooked for my mother. I bathed her. I fed her. I was her punching bag. She was an angry person with Alzheimer's. She was very independent, and so all the help that we were trying to give her, she wasn't very accepting of it. And so she became very combative. Bathing was a really hard task for us. And it wasn't until someone connected us to the Alzheimer's Association, and Susan Rowlett, who's probably on this call somewhere, gave me a DVD. That's how long ago this was, a DVD called Bathing Without the Battle. And when she gave me that DVD, it made me realize that there were resources out there to help caregivers take care of someone with Alzheimer's or dementia. So my journey of caregiving has not been an easy one. Anyone who's been a caregiver knows that it takes a physical and emotional toll on you. There were many days that I wanted to throw in the towel, and there are days now that I want to throw in the towel too. We made a lot of sacrifices. We made a lot of tough decisions. For many years, I worked part-time. My sister worked part-time too, so that we could keep my mom home and not have her go to a nursing facility, because that was one of the things my father had promised her, and we wanted to honor that promise, even though he wasn't physically able to care for her. So we took that on, and we made sure that we were able to take care of her. There was a time where I thought I wasn't going to get married. I wasn't going to have children. I wasn't going to have a fulfilling career. I was willing to give that up, to care for my mother, or didn't know that I could do both. But I met a pretty wonderful guy, and we got married, and we have a daughter now. She's 8. And he moved in with his in-laws. So I don't know how many guys are on this phone. Not many of you guys would want to move in with your in-laws, but my husband did that, and he became part of the caregiving team. So we took care of my mom until she passed away in 2016. And we took care of her from the time that she was diagnosed until the time, she took her last breath. And then I thought I was done. And a couple of years ago, my dad was diagnosed with dementia. And when we look back on it, I'm pretty sure he showed signs of dementia, but we were so busy taking care of my mom, and my dad was like, no, I'm fine, I'm fine. We didn't realize that he was actually going down this path as well, too. So caring for someone with a dementia diagnosis and an Alzheimer's diagnosis, I realized a lot of it is similar. But my dad is a lot calmer than my mom. So, and he actually can do some things for himself, but we do a lot of things for him. We do all the cooking. And he remembers, like, he can, if I lay out his clothes, he'll, get dressed. Same thing in the bathroom. He'll do those things too. He does need help bathing, but I don't do that this time. I have 2 brothers, and I've learned to ask for help. And so they are the ones that provide that care. The things that he doesn't remember, though, can be a little saddening. He doesn't remember the year or the date. He doesn't always remember if he ate or if he didn't eat, or if it's night or if it's day. And one thing is, he doesn't remember that my mother passed away. So there are days when he will ask, like, where's Mary? When's Mary coming? And we've learned to just, as Prilla had said, tell these fidlets, like, she's at the doctor, she went for a walk, she'll be back. But it's been very challenging. Because even though I was on this journey for so many years and I'm a caregiver coach, I should know how to deal with these things and all these behaviors. And for a long time, believe it or not, for a few months, I was in denial, like, he doesn't have dementia. He's not that, it's not that. But, one day it just hit me, and I was sobbing saying, my dad has dementia. Like, my mom had Alzheimer's, my dad has dementia. And I took I took a couple of weeks to just kind of pull myself together, and said, you know what, how to do this. Like, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. That there is life after caregiving, that you can caregive and live at the same time. And if it's one thing that I can share with the people on this call, is that I've learned a lot of lessons in this. one of the things is ask for help. And I know people say that, and I know it's not easy. But if you think about the things that overwhelm you that you just can't do. So this time around with my dad, I don't do any of the bathing. The boys were like, we call them the boys, that's what we call them. The boys take care of my dad's personal hygiene. We don't do it. Because when it was my mom, they were like, oh, it's a woman, I don't want to do it. So we're like, oh, it's dad, so you're going to do that. And, you know, I have a brother who didn't want to do any of the personal care, but he cleans a house like you would not believe. And so when he comes, everybody has a day of the week. When he comes, he cleans the house from top to bottom, you know, sweeps, mops, cleans the bathroom, everything. You leave and you think that you hired someone to come clean the house, which is huge, you know, because it's one less thing that we don't have to do. And then I have another brother who also cooks. That's his thing. So he will take cooking off my plate one day a week where he cooks and brings dinner so that I don't have to do that. The other thing I learned is that in terms of self-care, so everybody thinks self-care is like getting a massage and, you know, going out with your girlfriends and having drinks and stuff like that. But I've also learned that self-care for me is really just putting myself on the calendar. And that it was the gym prior to COVID. Now it's a virtual class. Sometimes I go to the grocery store and I spend extra time in the parking lot. You know, I'll sit in the car and look at, you know, read a book on my app on my phone, or, you know, trying to find ways where I can carve out time for myself so I can balance it out and still feel like I'm living a life. When my mom passed away, we went on our first family vacation as a family, and that was last year. And we hadn't been on a vacation in 10 years. I hadn't been on a vacation in 10 years. So in 20 years, I've been on a vacation twice. And we said we weren't going to do that anymore. Every year we were going to go on a vacation, and COVID happened and no vacation for 2020. So by 2020, I'm looking forward to 2021. But I would say that's another lesson that I learned, that you definitely have to care for yourself. Prilla mentioned the support group, and support groups have quite honestly been my saving grace. That's what helped me when I was caring for my mother. That's what helps me now, you know, in caring for my dad. Even though I'm a coach, I still need someone to support me too, because I have good days and bad days. And you know, I just feel like there is one thing I can say is there is life after and during caregiving. It can be done, but you really just have to make a point to say, I'm going to put myself on the calendar and take care of yourself so that you can take care of the person that you're caring for too. It really just makes you a better overall person. And I have someone to the left who wants to say something too, if that's okay. Come on, Mama. So, everybody, this is my daughter, Christina. Go ahead, Christina. You can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Christina, and I am Vinny's daughter, and I'm 8 years old. And
what did you want to share with folks?
So, my grandma passed away when I was 4 years old, and I remember when I came home from school, I was scared and I was confused because I didn't know what was happening because I was so little. And I asked my mom what was happening, and she said, Grandma's not here anymore. And so I went with my mommy and I hugged her and made her feel better, and she made me feel better. And
tell them what it's been like to watch Mommy take care of Grandma and Grandpa.
It's been an adventure. It was good and sometimes, and it was bad and sometimes. And I liked helping my mommy with my grandma and my grandpa, and I still help my grandpa. And I like helping my mom because it's something I could do when I'm bored and stuff. And I can help my grandpa. Sometimes I'll talk to him and say, "Are you okay, Grandpa?" Or I'll like entertain him. or I'll say, like, Grandpa, do you need something? Do you have to use the bathroom? And I'll tell Mommy or Daddy or Auntie. And he'll like go. And sometimes I'll help him do stuff that he doesn't want to do, and he'll do it for me.
Good job. So thank you guys. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob. So Bob, you could take it away. Thank you guys.
Bernice, thanks. That was a great experience hearing from your daughter. It's my grandchildren, my 4 grandsons that I really appreciate in helping me get through a lot as a caregiver. So welcome all out there in the audience. It seems like a fairly large group, over 60 people. So out there in the Zoom audience. Wanted to start a little bit by giving you a little bit more information on Jackie. She passed away in August 2019, and that was 2 days after her 72nd birthday. And when she passed away, she was in a memory unit and had been there for 6 months. Sometimes it seems like that was a few days ago, and other times it seems like it was years and years. I guess really after 52 years of being together, it just seems too soon. But it was in August of 2019 when she passed away. Jackie was an elementary school teacher for 30 years. And the first year of her teaching was in the Deep South, where I was in graduate school. And they were integrating the school system. And the way they did that, in integrating the school system, they would decide to do that by segregating the classes. That's another story. It was an awful way to handle integration. But the kids were always the central part of her life, and she learned from that and grew from that, and just had a wonderful class and wonderful group of parents that she worked with. She was most of her career was in the Lexington school system, and where she worked with kindergartners through 4th graders or 4th grade, and she was really, I know I'm biased, but she was pretty much a superstar with teaching of kids. She had this unbelievable ability to treat kids with humor and also respect. She could always manage their behavior, but she never left humor out, and there was such a respect there. We married when Jackie was 20 and I was 23. Now, for those of you guys out there that have a little trouble with math, I'll cut through some of that for you and let you know that puts me around 56 years old, give or take a few years, you know. But it was a good life, and it was a good long life for us. As far as about me, Barbara mentioned that I was a psychologist. I'm retired. But the interesting part there for me, I really saw myself as a prevention specialist. And as a prevention specialist, what that meant for a psychologist is I really believe that if we could get involved with people's problems very early on in a preventive way before they build, we could change the problems and make them less problematic, troublesome. Well, for those of you that are dealing with Alzheimer's, you know that was not a very good perspective. Prevention for Alzheimer's is not a chance. So I really found out that I needed to focus on Alzheimer's in a different way, and I had a lot to learn in doing that. I want to share some of the things that I learned as a caregiver. And first, they'll give you a little bit of a early indication of what we were dealing with. fairly early on, when we weren't sure what was going on with Jackie's memory, Jackie was driving home from our son's home, which a trip that she'd made many times. She was driving by herself and got lost and was just really struggled. She made it home, but was in panic city by the time she got home. In fact, she gave up driving right after that. Another incident that happened early on was we were walking to a night football game where we lived at that time in Sudbury, Massachusetts, and the lights, the atmosphere of high school football, lights off in the distance, and we were having a great walk and talking when she confused me with her dad. And even then, I saw that incident, a bit of rationalizing, I'm sure, but I saw that as that's something that she had experienced many times growing up in Stanton, Virginia, where I'm sure she did that, a similar walk with her dad many times. And so we tended to kind of rationalize what was going on and not taking it as super serious in terms of her memory. But we did tend to make a decision to focus on how to cope. How that we needed to figure out how we deal this, not try to prevent it, but figure out how are we going to cope with her memory loss. We made a concrete decision not to focus or think about diagnosis and treatment. And I wanted to give credit to a key person there, and it was our primary care physician, Dr. Lee Simmons at Mass General Hospital. She said to us, and I would go with Jackie. I'd go in to her medical appointments, and even early on, and we would meet together often with Dr. Simmons. And she said to me, Dr. Simmons said, you guys have been talking about this memory problem for a while. And she encouraged us to just focus on what we enjoy doing now and continue to appreciate each other each day. And she's, as I remember her times, what she said was, time will tell how seriously the problem is. And for us, that was great advice. We were able to travel. Sometimes it was fairly tense and not easy, but at that time, our daughter was living in Germany with her family. And we just did it. We went, and as I say, not always an easy trip, but it meant a lot to us to stay together and make that trip as often as we could. In fact, we were able to be present at the birth of each one of our grandsons in Germany, San Diego, and in Massachusetts. So those were the things in the orientation that really made a difference for us. As I said, although it wasn't always easy to be together that way. But what the point I wanted to make here was with Dr. Simmons, it was just, she was so helpful. And I really, for us, it was essential to have a primary care who had time for us and listened to us. And really, another very important thing, knew Alzheimer's disease and knew a little bit what we were going through. So that was tremendously important in the way we dealt with Alzheimer's and the way I was able to support Jackie and also deal with my own issues as a caregiver. I wanted to kind of switch now and talk a little bit about some of the things we did to cope. And I have three specific things I wanted to share with you. But first, the other day I was watching the TV, and an interview came on the TV with Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. And she had recently revealed that she had miscarried her second child. And it was this video was in the middle of an interview with a journalist. The journalist stopped in the middle of the interview, and I could see, and you looked at Meghan Markle's face, and you could just see the grief and the intensity of the grief and the sadness all over her face. But this journalist stopped and said to her, "Are you okay?" And her response back was, "Thank you for asking." Boy, she had decided, she said in an article I read later, she had decided not to suffer in silence. And for me, it just resonated with me greatly. That interview happened recently, but I went back to my past. As I said, Jackie passed away in August of 2019. Had to think for a minute, but it really took me back to some of the things that we dealt with and needed to deal with as a couple to take care of each other, and particularly as a caregiver, to take care of myself. So I had three issues that I wanted to share with you here. And the first one was, it was a huge step for us to share with others what was happening. And we made a decision really together that Jackie was going to tell her book group of old friends, friends that went back 30 plus years that she had met with in a book group. I also met with the husbands at the same time. We just didn't read. We went out and drank and ate while they were meeting as a book group. But it was like when Jackie did this, and she did this, as a group said, with not a lot of emotion, but just put it out there. And they were very impressed at the way that she was able to do that. But it was like lifting a burden of secrecy off both of our shoulders. And it gave them the permission to ask, "Are you okay?" And it was tremendous, and that still happens for me today. That same group, husbands and wives, still reach out, and that for me, it was terrific. And when I found out that I didn't have to work so hard to cover for Jackie and to protect her, that was what I would typically do, so people didn't know the mistake she made, and it was tremendous amount of energy spent there. I didn't have to do that any longer. The word was out, and people responded with care and support. That was the first thing that I learned. It took me a while to understand that, or to learn that. But the second thing I wanted to mention was couples therapy. Tremendously helpful, and particularly for me, even though Jackie and I went together. And we were in a session with an outstanding therapist who happens to be our moderator, Barbara. Susan was also one of our, on the staff too, and Susan was also one of our therapists. It certainly is a plus living close to Mass General Hospital. We really reap the benefits of being supported by the staff there in many, many ways. But going back to the therapy session, we were talking about Jackie's loss. And I said, the two of us went to therapy together. And we were talking about the loss, and she was able to talk about a little bit. And I was able to be really vulnerable, and sad sometimes, and struggled sometimes with all kinds of feelings of anger and frustration and sadness, as I'm sure all of us on the panel and many of us in the audience have felt. It's like a roller coaster ride. But when we were talking about Jackie's loss, Barbara said to me, you have a loss here. And it should have been obvious to me, but it wasn't. And she said it very bluntly, "You want Jackie back like she was." And I did. and it gave me kind of permission to deal with my own loss, which was very helpful in support groups and a variety of support services out there. But one other thing happened in the group. As I was think I'm getting smarter here, I said to Jackie, just let me be your administrative assistant. I'll make your appointments, I'll keep them for you, I'll get you there. All the time, this is for me because of the stress of kind of arguing or fighting with her over issues and things. This would take it all off the table. And surprisingly, with Barbara there, she enthusiastically agreed to do that. Now, thinking back, I think on Barbara's face was, yeah, this is really going to happen, but I didn't see that at the time or pay any attention to it. So on the way home, walking home from Mass General, I said to Jackie, geez, I'm so glad you're going to let me be your administrative assistant. And for those of you that knew Jackie or met her, she was very independent and fairly strong in her independency. And she looked up at me and she said, I'm not going to do that. And the lesson there was our therapy doesn't work too well with people who have a memory problem. So though we continue to go to therapy together, the therapy was more for me than for Jackie, and it helped me to understand what I couldn't change too. So the last issue I want to share with you was really fairly shortly before Jackie went into the memory care unit. At the end of 2018, we had friends call us. And what the point of this is that it's really important for caregivers to keep your friends very close. Your family, obviously, as Bernice and Prilla have talked about the importance of family, but that friends, keep them very close. So this two couples, very close friends for over 30 years, said to us on New Year's Eve, let's go out to dinner, an early dinner. And I really didn't know whether we would be able to do this and agreed to do it. And it really was a wonderful dinner. And it was the last time the six of us would be together like that. So it was really a celebration. However, on the way home, we're walking through the Boston Public Garden, and Jackie hustles off from me. And I kind of let her go thinking she would come back, and she didn't. And I yelled for her, and she continued faster to run from me. And I think when I look at it now, I'm not sure she even remembered who I was. And then makes sense. If you have a stranger yelling at you, you're going to run. So out of frustration and anger and some panic, I would go out of the public garden and run down the sidewalk and grab her, hold her before she crossed the street. So we walk home that way. And as we're walking home on the brick sidewalks in Beacon Hill, Jackie catches her toe. She goes down face first. I break the fall by holding the back of her coat. And when you know, I go down on top of her. Now, you have to think of the scene. This is New Year's Eve. There's two old farts out drinking, and we're lying on the sidewalks. And after I realized that neither one of us were hurt, I was lying on the sidewalk on top of Jackie, no less, and I started to chuckle. And I laughed all the way home. And since that time, I've thought of this incident and laughed. And the point being here is you really have to look at laughter even in the down times and the struggle times. And they become memories, as they are to me now, that strengthen me. And The big thing is, for me, is humor and laughter are good medicine. So I think with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back to Barbara. I really appreciate the time to do this. I hope it's been helpful. It certainly has for me to listen to Bernice and Prilla, and it's also helpful for me to tell my story. So thank you, guys.
Myself. Hi. Oh, you know, Bob, Prilla, and Bernice, our chat is filled. And what it's filled with is gratitude to you. Thank you. Thank you for your heart-wrenching, beautiful stories. Thank you for positive perspective. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I think I speak for my team, my colleagues, but I want you to know I have never seen in our programs so many expressions of absolute heartfelt gratitude. And in fact, each of you has brilliantly and eloquently and so openly and honestly shared with us your moments of pain, your moments of joy, your moments of reflection and humor, loss. It's just remarkable. And we also have your vulnerability that has been offered, and gratitude. I'd like to ask a couple of questions and follow up. You all raised so many themes. And Prilla, you named loss as ambiguous loss. And clearly, Bob, you spoke, of course, of when the loss hit you and you began to cry and realize who you were losing. And Bernice, of course, your mother was disappearing she in a combative way, your dad in a more gentle way. I think that what we all know is that the experience of a person with dementia and for the caregiver of loving someone with dementia is very different than any other illness because the person's soul and spirit is disappearing, as you said, Prilla, while their body is there. I'd like to return for a moment to those feelings of loss and sadness. And I think for a caregiver, what's so hard is you're feeling that sadness while also running as fast as you can to provide care. Anybody want to just comment on that? Unmute yourselves. And it's really to reflect more, if you wish, on crying while being an assistant, crying while giving your mother a bath. How do you handle all of those emotions? Or are they just forever there?
So when you were saying crying while bathing your mother, I remember it was Thanksgiving. I don't remember what year. I don't know. It was when I was dating my husband. I remember that. And I was giving her a bath, and I was exactly what you said, like on go, 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 just in it, just making sure that she was okay, just going about the daily routine. And I went into the bathroom, and she was just like, she wouldn't stop hitting me, and I couldn't take it anymore. And I threw the towel down, and I just walked out the bathroom, and I left her standing there naked in the bathroom. And I cried in the kitchen for what seemed like so long. And my dad had just come over to me, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he was just like, you can do it. Like, you got this. You have to do this because I can't do it. And I was like, I'm sick of this. She doesn't know who I am. Like, I just fell apart in that moment. And I think just having someone else nearby or close by who can say, it's okay, what you're feeling is warranted, I know you don't want to go through this, but you got to get back in there and you got to do it. And then once I did, he came in the bathroom with me. So because it's a little awkward having your parents in the bathroom, and she's like giggly, you know, it's just a little awkward. But she responded well to him, and there were many moments when I just needed him to be there with me to care, you know, to provide care to her. But it was hard, you know. I feel like you need someone there for you just to kind of give you that extra encouragement.
Thank you. And Bob and Prilla, you both spoke very clearly about needing your friends, your family to support you. And what Bernice is saying, to validate also, of course this is hard, but I've got you. I'm here for you.
Yeah, I think for me, the family was the first front there. And I don't know what I would have done if I wouldn't had their foot in my back to do something to get help in. And that is the hardest thing to bringing somebody into where we lived and get, hopefully Jackie would accept that, but then getting to the memory unit. And Prilla's comments on what she did there was beautifully described, that whole process, and our spouses not wanting to be there. I think it's even harder to deal with that right now with the virus. And I really needed to have somebody, and that's probably going to be family rather than friends, to put their foot in back and say, you got to take action. You've got to take action. You won't survive this yourself with the stress and so on. And you know, the other thing I haven't talked about much, but as a psychologist who does a lot with mind-body stuff and stress and health, 6 months after Jackie passed, I ended up with high blood pressure. I've never had high blood pressure in my life. A few months after that, I had stomach issues. I mean, all the things that I treated and practiced in prevention, I didn't do very well with myself because you're so overwhelmed with staying in the fight. You know, it's really, really difficult to back off. And family helped me do that. Thank God.
I've relied heavily on family. I think one of the early conversations, it must have been, I don't know, a year or two beyond earlier than what I was talking about. I remember that I was having a conversation in one of my son's living room, and the other son was there. And I don't remember exactly what we were talking about. It was about George and about things that were going on, but I just started uncontrollably crying. And it was terribly embarrassing because I'd never done that with my sons before, and I couldn't stop. And it was also very comforting when they came over and put their arms around me, and still I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
It was very hard. That was at least a year before I realized that my role with them was shifting, that I needed them emotionally in a way that I never had before. I was still trying to be the independent woman, the mother, and I couldn't be. It was very upsetting.
Yeah.
And as a tribute to you and George's parents, and to Bob and Jackie as parents, and Bernice, now that we all know your precious 8-year-old daughter, to you as a mother who's bringing your daughter into the situation, what validation for you that when you needed to cry, your children were there for you. And it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to change your role, but you needed it.
Yeah.
Right.
Can I ask you, each of you, to speak about, you've mentioned physical and emotional toll of caregiving. Does that resonate? Bob, you just told us about your high blood pressure and stomach issues. We do know that caregivers are very frequently the people who don't take care of themselves physically. They don't go to the doctor. They don't have time to notice their symptoms. And then it's often after the fact that there is a surge of issues. Bernice, you're nodding. Does that resonate for you?
You know, it does. And I should know better, but I'm just going to be really transparent right now because I rarely talked about it. But I went to the doctor, you know, maybe 2 months ago, and had a mammogram, and she had been telling me to get one for the last 3 years or so. And I had been putting it off because I was too busy. I don't think I had one since my mother passed away. And the results were, you know, they found several lumps, and I had to do a biopsy last week. Thankfully, you know, everything came back benign, but it reminded me of how, you know, you have to take care of yourself. You have to keep your appointments. You have to do those things. And I forgot about that. You know, I forgot that I'm supposed to, you know, I get my dad to his doctor's appointments, but I wasn't getting myself to the doctor's appointments to like take care of myself. And so it was a good reminder that just you got to care for yourself, you know, keep yourself get those appointments in there, make sure you're doing okay. And when I was caring for my mom, I gained a ton of weight. Oh my goodness. I realized that I was an emotional eater. And so when she passed away, you know, I started going to the gym, and I realized when I was sad, I went to the refrigerator. You know, I just realized that. And it wasn't until I went to the doctor and they're like, "You're up 36 pounds." I'm like, huh? How did this happen? Who knows?
What a revelation that when you're so busy or taking care of someone you love, you don't even know what you're putting in your mouth. You're not taking care of yourself physically and emotionally. Here's a question for each of you to offer advice. If I'm taking your advice, I'm going to go get my mammogram next week, but I'm also the full-time caregiver of a parent. How do I do it? How do I ask someone for help? I mean, there are a lot of people who always say, call me if you need anything. Any advice about, Bob said people sort of pushed you in the back. You know, a lot of people want to help, but don't know how. Any advice? And sometimes it's the job of the caregiver to teach people how to help you. Bernice, you taught your brothers how to come forward. What about those friends who?
I think the problem is more we don't ask. And when people, even when they respond, we tend to say, we don't say, yeah, if you would just do this or that, or we tend to say, I'm good, I'm fine. And I think as caregivers, it's very hard to ask. I think not so much for my family, with my family it was, but certainly going outside the family, I didn't. I depended on them to come to me, and they really don't know how to do that any more than I did when I was on the other side trying to help.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Well, I really didn't go outside of family. I think that, well, I don't think we had a lot of close couple friends, and my friends were all sort of scattered all over the city, my artist friends. I don't think, I didn't ask, and I don't know what I would have asked for.
I think sometimes that's the challenge.
Yeah.
What am I asking for?
Having good conversations with a friend on the phone, that was good. That was always good. But, you know, the people I know were very caught up in their own lives.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Sorry.
Bernice, speak. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that if I think back about how hard it was for us to ask for help too, I think one of the things that prevented us from asking was that we felt like people weren't going to be able to do it the way or as good as we did it. You know, we thought we were superstar caregivers. And so once we let go of, you know, they may not get mom dressed in the order that we do, but it's going to get done, like, and not really care about the outcome of how it, you know, the process of getting that task done, just that the task was done, then it became easier for us to, a little bit easier for us to ask for help, because we'd say, okay, fine, they're not going to cook the salmon the way we would, but at least we're going to have dinner cooked, you know. So if that's any help.
And I have some comments to read. One follow-up about getting help. A woman tells us, I followed a friend's advice and gave specific items where friends could help. Go to lunch, go for a walk with my husband, just for a half hour or so. Our friends were thankful that I gave them an assignment. And they had a job. They signed up. And I have another comment that you all need to hear. Such a moving evening. Oops, having been through this and on the other side, it revs up memories, but also such a sense of connection to all three of you. Thank you so much for the virtual hugs and understanding, and for knowing there are such wonderful people like you out there. And then I have an important question, and please anyone take it, on the Fiblet question. You all are experts on Fiblet. Following up on the Fiblet question, is every person different? Does it work for some people with dementia, but honesty might work better for others? Anyone want to take on the Fiblet question? I think I will just say one thing while you're thinking of your answers. No one strategy for people with dementia works all the time, every time, or well. Just like rarely does a strategy for us always work. So Fiblets can sometimes, it depends upon what you're presenting, how agitated or anxious or upset the individual might be, the setting. There are so many variables. Really, you had that moment with George and the sailing.
Yeah, now it's easy for me to just go with where he is and to deflect and stuff. But it was a very long struggle because of the way our relationship had been. And it seems to me that most of the time that he was still at home, I would try to, you know, talk about reality. I mean, if he was saying he was wondering whether his mother was still alive, he thought maybe she was still alive, I would say, well, no, she's not. Do you remember? She died, da 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 da. And that's what I did, because I didn't know better and I wasn't in a support group yet.
And that's why we talk about caring for someone you love with dementia is one of the hardest things you can do, because your style of communication has to change completely.
Yeah.
And this is with someone you were married to for 52 years. I have a couple of other comments and questions.
Barbara?
Yes,
Barbara,
please.
on the Fiblet bit, I was thinking about when we were walking towards the football lights and so on. And at that time, I could say to Jackie, you're thinking about your dad. It didn't need to be a Fiblet. She was able at that point in her disease she could take it in and we just passed it off and kept going. But I think as the disease got worse, Fiblets help you get out of really tight spots, like take me home, or I'm going to go work with my father today or something. Just things that don't have no rational basis to them. And then I think a Fiblet helps for anybody and everybody who's that far along with the disease. I don't know whether that makes sense. It's just kind of an insight here. I
Thank
wasn't
you,
very
Bob.
good at fiblets, by the way. Psychologists don't tell fiblets.
One of the things, one quick comment, then I'll have some wonderful other comments. One thing we talk about, when we even talk about fiblets and we talk about communication, the person with dementia is at a later stage. What you respond to, we suggest, is more the emotion, the affect, rather than even the words. So if I want to go home, or if I want my mother, but my mother died 80 years ago, we've learned, but it's a learning process, that I must be feeling anxious and nervous, and I'm longing for a hug if I want my mother. And so the goal is to respond to how my heart is probably aching, rather than the words "mother died" will mean nothing. But that's a learning process. I want to say a few things, read you. Thanks, Bernice, for admitting that it can be difficult to see jobs done differently than you may do it yourself. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. I look forward to more of these. Thank you, Prilla, Bernice, and Bob, for your remarkable courage and honesty. Thank you all for your dear stories and thoughts. I much appreciated listening and learning. Thank you so much. This is from Susanna. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Bob, Bernice, and Prilla. Your stories moved me to tears, but also inspired and, in quotes, warmed the cockles of my heart, unquote, as my mother, who has advanced dementia, used to say. So you warmed the cockles of her heart. And here is a very important comment. I think we'll have time for two more. How to not have a person with dementia experience infantilization. That's very hard. I think, if I'm having to simplify my speech, if I'm having to give direction, and maybe Bernice, as a dementia coach, this is probably something you talk about a good deal. Would you like to address?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
It's
I do think that's a tough one. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I've learned, and I think Susan may have shared this with me many years ago, is that a person with the diagnosis, their feelings remain. And so even if they can't articulate how our responses are making them feel, they still feel it. So I often tell caregivers that exactly what you said, Barbara, is that you've got to respond to the feeling and not necessarily, what they might be saying or what you could say. So sometimes it's that, what's the word here? To redirect, that's it, to redirect.
And it's hard. And I think that when we do that, I think that when we are responding to the affect and not the words, that can tend to help us avoid what may sound unintentionally like infantilization. Like, for example, if Bernice is saying, if I'm telling Bernice, I want my mother, I want my mother. And rather than saying, now, Barbara, your mother died 15 years ago, which is kind, but that's when the tone sometimes we are all bothered by.
Yeah.
If you say, you really love your mother, don't you, Barbara? I'm sure you miss her. I think that when we work with how we communicate, then our tone is the respectful and loving tone. I have one last comment to read and for you all to comment on. Jeanette says, I'm intrigued by more frequent sharing of the diagnosis in recent years and the impact that may have on the ability of friends and a broader community to help and support. So this is, do any of you want to comment on what, Bob, you spoke to and you all have spoken about, telling friends, acknowledging rather than keeping dementia a secret? Do each of you want to have some final comments on that issue?
I never kept it a secret. I mean, I gave a lot of information out. And particularly, around, you know, with people that don't live here. And I got wonderful email replies and, you know, very supportive stuff when I shared information. So I'm very grateful to that from friends far and wide and family far and wide. I'm very grateful.
I think I think there are more people understand what Alzheimer's is, and they're more open to it, you know. And I'm not sure why, but it reminds me of a story that towards before Jackie, where we're still kind of walking the streets of Boston and hand in hand and all, and Jackie would just speak to everybody on the street, you know. And I always worried about what people would think, and I didn't say, oh, she has Alzheimer's, that's the reason, but I almost felt like I needed to do that. I didn't. So I said to her on the street corner, Charles Street, and right on the corner, I said, Jackie, you don't need to speak to everybody on the street. She looked up at me and said, why? It's a nice thing to do. I found myself from then on looking for people who were lost in Boston and going up to them and say, could I help you? So a little bit of a crazy story around telling people Alzheimer's, but it always isn't a bad thing, you know, too. With what she was doing was good and caring, and I needed to loosen up a little bit. And, so I think the more people that know, the better.
That was great. And Bob, it's a good ending because you spoke of the benefit of humor. And I think you all have spoken about the many, many, many emotions, you know, humor, anger, sadness, loss. You've all experienced one of everything. And you are all such treasures to all of us. Again, I just want to tell you, the adjectives about all of you are, again, gratitude for your generosity of sharing, of teaching, for your courage, for your honesty. You know, I have the privilege of knowing each of you, and yet I have to say that tonight I found myself entirely newly absorbed and moved and just in awe of, again, your courage and the wisdom. Please know that your presence tonight is a gift to everyone who's been listening. And I thank you on behalf of, we had over 60 people and there will be more. Please know, and on behalf of Prilla, your wonderful George, Bob, your wonderful Jackie, and Bernice, your fantastic parents, and your wonderful daughter, and your husband who moved in with his in-laws, and Bob and Prilla, your friends and your children and your grandchildren. They are all so fortunate to have you in the center of their lives. And thank you for your gift to us tonight. So I'm going to just end the program, even though I don't want to, but I know I'll get a sign pretty soon. They'll pull me, you know, they'll pull me off. I want to thank everyone and also let you know that our next seminar is on January 19th. It's the third Tuesday with Erica Curcio, who is a licensed mental health counselor and a registered art therapist. She actually works with people with dementia at the Goddard House Assisted Living. And please join us and we'll learn about the many powerful ways that art can be of benefit, both for people with dementia and caregivers. And again, many, 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 many thanks. Wish you all safe, healthy seasons. Good night, everyone.